Chapter 5 of Oliver Twist gives us a little more information about Mr. and Mrs. Sowerberry, and I still kind of like Mr. Sowerberry. Again, he's not necessarily a great character, and he does agree with some things that Mr. Bumble says that I completely disagree with. There is a poor woman who is sick, and instead of going to see her, the doctor simply sends some medicine that he has put in a bottle that used to hold shoe polish. And when the husband sends it back saying she can't take it, this won't help her for her malady. They feel like they should know their place. But at the same time, how does the doctor know what's wrong with her? He didn't go to see her, and he was simply asked to come and wait on her, not told, what was wrong with her. And so, like I said, Mr. Bumble's saying all of this, and Mr. Sowerberry does agree. And then we have a pretty good caricature of Mrs. Sowerberry as the sour wife, the mean wife. And then we have as well the two other children who live there, who are Charlotte, the housemaid, and Noah, who is a charity boy. And it's also rather interesting to see how all of these characters interact, and the way that even though Noah, Charlotte, and Oliver are all the same level, Oliver's still the one who gets looked down on. And I do feel like this is another chapter that has a lot of sarcasm, a lot of satire, and I really do enjoy that. And honestly, at times this book can be a bit much. It feels like the characters aren't really fully fleshed out. They're just cardboard cutouts. But it does make it fun because it's just taken to an absurd, and there are some really good moments as well. Chapters 6 and 7 show Oliver plucking up a spirit. Noah Claypole is taunting him, teasing him, finally goes too far, and Oliver fights back. And this has one of Mr. Bumble's quotes that illustrates why I dislike him so much. He says that Oliver has been fed too much meat. You've raised an artificial soul and spirit in him, unbecoming a person of his condition. What have paupers to do with soul or spirit? It's quite enough that we let him have live bodies. As if he has any right to say who deserves to live or not. So yeah, that perfectly illustrates why I dislike him so much, and yet why he's also one of my favorite characters, because Mr. Bumble is just so absurd. It's very hard for me to believe that Mr. Bumble truly believes this, and he's a mouthpiece, and it's pretty obvious, but it's also funny. This chapter also ends with a rather sentimental parting. Oliver has decided to go seek his fortunes in London, and he passes the baby farm where he was raised and sees one of his old friends, and they have a very emotional goodbye. And these emotional goodbyes that almost seem manipulative is something that's very common in Victorian literature, and I do feel like it was still written well, and especially for how early this is in Dickens' career, and the fact that for the first several chapters he didn't know that this was going to be a novel. It was just going to be some short sketches in part of a different project. Everything really like ties together, and it all just works very well together and keeps you interested. Chapter 8 introduces us to one of the most famous characters in this book, and that is the Artful Dodger, young John Dawkins. And this gives a really good idea of how well Dickens can describe characters. So we have the boy who addressed this inquiry to young Oliver was about his own age, but one of the queerest looking boys that Oliver had ever seen. He was a snub-nosed, flat-browed, common-faced boy enough, and as dirty a juvenile as one would wish to see, but he had about him all the airs and manners of a man. He was short of his age, with rather bow legs and little sharp, ugly eyes. His hat was stuck on the top of his head so lightly that it threatened to fall off every moment, and would have done so very often, if the wearer had not had a knack of every now and then giving his head a sudden twitch which brought it back to its old place again. And yeah, you can tell, like, Dickens just really has fun with this, and he sketches from real life a lot of times. He would see somebody on the street, possibly dressed like that, and just write a description and then flesh it out. And it's one of those things that makes his writing really fun. And he also imbues places and furniture and such with personalities, as we've seen throughout this book as well. The way he talks about the alley where the woman died, the first woman that he saw who died, and describing how the rats are skeletal as well. And yeah, I'm just really having fun with this so far, and this will end this installment, and then we're going to have a 2-day break, so we'll be going back Sunday to read more. So chapter 9 brings us some more description of where Oliver has landed. We get to see Fagin and the Artful Dodger. Get to see them interact a little more. And then we also meet Charlie Bates. And we get some pretty interesting dialogue, and some dialogue that hints at darker things to come. And I do kind of like how, Oliver just kind of takes everything at face value, although, as the reader, we can kind of see the deeper stuff behind it. And we get some rather comic scenes as well, like Fagin at play with the boys. And as with the other chapters, I am enjoying this. I am enjoying reading it slower. So yeah, I know the next chapter should have a little bit more action, and I'll probably have more to say about it. So chapters 10 and 11 of Oliver Twist are now painting a picture of the justice system rather than the workhouse or anything like that. And I do know that Mr. Fang is actually completely and totally based on one rather notorious magistrate, Mr. Lang, who Charles Dickens did report on while he was a court reporter just several short months before writing this chapter. And there's some very interesting history at this point about Charles Dickens himself. in the fact that this is where he was going to end Oliver Twist, and we are still very far from the end of the novel as we now know it today. And again, thanks to Jean, she is the one who kind of gathers all this information during our read, and she has posted it in the Dickensians group. And I just find all this very fascinating, and I also love the absolute biting sarcasm that Charles Dickens has in these chapters. And as I said earlier, you can tell that he is a very young man who has an opinion, and he is going to state what it is. And I feel like he does a good job of balancing this with his description of people as well. And it's definitely interesting, as I've read later novels, to see how he is able to, in later novels, step back from the narrator voice and let his characters speak for themselves and show what he wants shown without stepping in himself. And so this is where I'm going to stop this video, because this is also the end of an installment, and I will be back with a new video for Oliver Twist in probably about a week, and that should get us to the end of another installment or two. So stay tuned for more, and like and subscribe, and follow the link to join in our group read on Dickensians on Goodreads.